sense to our knowledge of the bird cult. It's very, very big. Not sure how old it is. And now switching to night vision. Interesting aroma in here. Bats, guana. This is the way that it comes in. More side chambers here. Here. And in here they found lots of mummified birds. Wow. But here's the rest of your tomb of the birds.
Oh my god! That's amazing!
MSNBC reported earlier today that a team of British explorers had identified the location of an extensive cave complex under the Giza Plateau. A few weeks ago, we reported on the discovery of a huge cave complex running beneath the Giza Plateau in Egypt. British explorer Andrew Collins announced the discovery last month. But in an internet blog issued last night by Dr. Zawi Hawass, who heads the Supreme Council of Egyptian Antiquities, Hawass says there is no underground cave complex at this site. Last night, the story took the most bizarre twist of all in an episode of the History Channel series called Chasing Mummies. In last night's episode, titled Bats, Hawass was actually shown the cave entrance by the American film crew. It was hidden inside an obscure tomb and was not listed on any modern surveys of Giza. Hawass and the film crew were harassed by thousands of bats as they explored the cave complex for a distance of 350 feet, which was the precise length mentioned by Collins in his book published over a year ago.
We're in the cave system beyond the Tomb of the Birds. We've come back for the third time now. It's been a little bit of a situation trying to get in here, but finally we've got here. We're following up the possibility that there might be other things to find in this tomb, and obviously to push on as far as we possibly can.
Of all the archaeological wonders of the world, Egypt's antiquities hold the greatest fascination for many, many people. There are over 100 pyramids in Egypt and thousands of other tombs, temples, and ruins. In particular, the pyramid and Sphinx complex at Giza has always been a magnet for explorers and looters who have been drawn to the site in search of its treasures and haunting mysteries. And while the pyramids and the Sphinx are the most obvious monuments on the Giza Plateau, for several thousand years, people have thought that there is much more to be found below the ground. It has long been believed that something important is missing in Egyptian history that could perhaps point to the true origins of civilization. In short, many people believe that something of great importance remains hidden and undiscovered at Giza, buried under sand and rubble. The quest to discover this hidden information has become a goal for countless people.
My interest in Egypt started from a very, very young age, but it wasn't until the mid-1990s where I really started to have a more serious interest in the subject and researched it a lot deeper, and went out there and visited the sites, visited Giza 3 or 4 times a year, every year up until now. My main interest was that there was just something missing. Whatever you read in textbooks or watched on the television and documentaries, there always seemed to me something missing. There was an X chromosome or whatever it was that was like missing from the whole story. And so when I'd go out there, I would check everything that was in the textbooks, go and visit all the sites, visit all the little anomalies that were supposed to be there on the Giza Plateau, and still just carry on searching and searching and questioning everything that I could find and everything that I came across.
And my interest in Egypt started off back in about 1997, it must have been. I was enthralled by all the stories of conspiracy accounts and stories that were going on at Giza, secret digging going on in the pyramid, all kinds of stuff being covered up and hushed up by the authorities, all that kind of stuff. I was reading all the stuff on the internet and following all that, and I thought, oh, this is all very interesting stuff. I wonder what the truth is behind it. Around about the same time, I actually came across an account of what turned out to be the Osiris shaft, which actually described it more in terms of being part of a fabulous underground network. But the thing was it did tie it in with archaeologist's report, someone called Salim Hassan, Dr. Salim Hassan. So I thought at that time, well, if this archaeologist's report is being referred to in this book, it must exist, so I'll go out and find it, try and find it. And that set me off on this quest of trying to reconcile the story that the imperative of the Rosicrucian Order gave about this complex of underground rooms and chambers and tunnels at Giza with the account by an eminent Egyptologist. And it took me quite a long time to get to the bottom of that, and it turned out there'd been a lot of, how should we put it, spin going on, is I suppose a polite way of putting it. It's quite possible that places like Giza, there are sites and underground locations as yet undiscovered, unfound, which have been used by the ancient Egyptians and which could contain artifacts or might contain inscriptions or something which would help to fill in some of the gaps on Egyptian history.
One of the greatest mysteries at Giza is that there is something underground, some kind of secret chamber.
Over 1,600 years ago, the Roman historian Marcellinus wrote that beneath the Giza Plateau were underground passages and fissures with winding paths narrowing down to what he called syringes, or small tube-like passages. In the 1400s, Arab historians wrote that prior to the Great Flood, subterranean passages were constructed under Giza as repositories for the accumulated wisdom and knowledge of the ancient world. In more recent times, the famous American psychic Edgar Cayce spoke of this repository of knowledge, calling it a hall of records. In a 1933 reading, Cayce related that this hall of records had been sealed shut over 12,000 years ago. According to Cayce, the records were contained on 32 stone tablets in an underground chamber near the Sphinx that was accessed through tunnels or passageways. Finding this Hall of Records has been a primary aim of the Cayce organization, starting with drilling around the Sphinx in 1957. These efforts continue to this day, but nothing definitive has ever been found. Andrew Collins, a well-respected British explorer and science writer, has long been interested in the possibility that a complex of chambers is hidden under the Giza Plateau. Collins has written about the mysterious origins of Egyptian culture, but he began his quest to find this underground labyrinth in an unusual way.
My interest in what lies beneath the plateau at Giza began in 1985. Up to that time I was aware of the stories of a so-called Hall of Records existing, beneath the Sphinx, beneath the pyramids, but I hadn't really taken any active interest in it up until that time. But I was working at the time with a friend who had psychic abilities, and he had a very strange dream where he found himself going beneath the Sphinx and entering this large chamber which had green walls and led into a much deeper complex. And he recounted this to me, and so fantastic was it that I thought, I've got to look into this further. I've got to see if anything like this actually exists. Well, clearly it had no relationship to the dynastic Egyptians. That was quite clear. And as fantastic as these ideas were, they intrigued me. In 1998 I wrote a book called Gods of Eden, which looked at the idea that the Egyptian civilization might be far older than what the history books have suggested. And this led to a lot of debate and speculation relating again to what might lie beneath the plateau, particularly as I was looking at various ancient texts from Egypt itself, which did seem to suggest that the ancient Egyptians themselves believed in some kind of cave underworld known as the Duat, through which the soul of the pharaoh would travel on his way to the afterlife, an afterlife amongst the stars. So I began to go out to Egypt, and the first real clue was my discovery of a well in the Muslim cemetery to the south of the Sphinx, which, although revered locally, was unknown to the outside world, had never been written about in any book. And I discovered that there was a strong legend that suggested that it linked with underground passages that went off from there into some kind of underground palace, city, or structure. However, this also dovetailed with work that I was doing at the time into the significance of the constellation of Cygnus, the Northern Cross.
Collins' 2006 book, The Cygnus Mystery, was a detailed investigation into how dozens of important ancient sites were aligned to the constellation of Cygnus. Collins found that countless ancient ruins in the Americas, Europe, Asia, and Egypt had been constructed in a way that made important alignments centering on Cygnus. His discovery of the well at Giza was included in his book.
In cultures all around the world, from the Neolithic era onwards to the present day, it's been seen as a point of entry and exit into the sky world, or a place of the afterlife, particularly because it is prominently placed upon the Milky Way, at a position known as the Great Rift or Cygnus Rift. This is a dark region that runs down the centre of the Milky Way, and it actually begins in the area of Cygnus. And once again, indigenous cultures see this as some kind of birth canal, tunnel, or point of entrance into some kind of other reality, some kind of other world. And it did seem as if Cygnus played a role in Egypt. And at that point, my colleague, the engineer Rodney Hale, started to think about whether Cygnus might have some role at the plateau at Giza, and in a moment of epiphany one night decided that he would look at the possible correlation between the stars of Cygnus and the positions on the ground of the three pyramids.
Well, I'd read the Orion mystery book. I was worried about the Orion belt stars. They only occupy a small bit of sky, and to translate that onto a large chunk of landscape seemed a little bit of a stretch of imagination to do that. So I photographed, I had a decent camera, a Zeiss Icon there. I photographed Orion one night because I hadn't got much in the way of computer programs at that time, and made in large prints, and superimposed them on a map of Giza. And I was quite surprised. The fit was very poor, really. The third star, if you centered up two stars on the two pyramids, the third one actually lay outside the boundary of the third pyramid, and this sort of worried me, and it sort of preyed on my mind for some time. I found myself wondering whether Cygnus would fit on the pyramids, it came quite strongly right in the middle of the night, and luckily I remembered it in the morning, so the first thing in the morning was to try and get myself some pictures of Cygnus and overlay them on the map of the pyramids. And to my amazement, the 3 wing stars fitted absolutely accurately. You couldn't have wished for better precision. I was so excited about this. And I started communicating with Andy Collins about this accuracy, and looking at the alignment on the Giza plateau, I found that the line down to Alberio, the head star of the swan, lay right through a prominent hill there, Jebel Gibli, and it lay right across it, and it occurred to me that would have been an ideal viewpoint for anyone deciding on the layout of the pyramids. You got a nice overall view of the plateau.
Rodney Hill then made a series of calculations and found something amazing. Not only did the 3 Giza pyramids fit the stars of Cygnus perfectly, another significant alignment with Cygnus was present at Giza.
You will see the 3 Cygnus stars, the 3 wing stars of Cygnus, setting into the 3 peaks of the pyramids.
From a point behind Jebel Gibli, the builders of the pyramids would have seen the 3 wing stars of Cygnus simultaneously set directly into the top point of all 3 pyramids. It was an important discovery that clearly pointed to the fact that the Giza pyramids were constructed to mimic Cygnus. Yet one very important star of the Cygnus constellation seemed to be missing at Giza.
After Rodney had realised that the wing stars of Cygnus matched perfectly the positions on the ground of the 3 pyramids at Giza, I started to look into this and became intrigued by the fact that the brightest star of the constellation, Deneb, seemed to have no obvious marker on the ground. And I thought, well, this is strange, because quite clearly, if we have a ground sky relationship, surely this must have some marker. So I looked into this, in particular working with my colleague Nigel Skinner-Simpson, and we realised that there was actually something on the ground. It was a mastaba tomb, a large rectangular stone and earth-built tomb from the Old Kingdom period, so dating to around 2500 BC, which nothing had ever been found there, and is known as Lepsius 14 because it was investigated in the mid-19th century by the German explorer Carl Lepsius. This mastaba is not significant, so this disappointed me. However, I spoke to another colleague, and they suggested that maybe what you're looking at here is something underground. And I think this was the first time that I actually put this thought to myself and thought, well, yeah, maybe it does mark something. I mean, obviously, one of the greatest mysteries of the plateau is the fact that there is some kind of secret chamber or hidden chamber that maybe represents the sort of the tomb of the first god. Some say it's of Osiris, or that it might be some kind of chamber of first creation. And maybe this is linked with that. It was just a speculation, an idea. So what this did was focus my attentions on the northwest area of the plateau, whereas at that time the search for the so-called Hall of Records or any other secret chamber was focused on the east side of the plateau in the area of the Sphinx. All eyes were looking towards the Sphinx for answers, but I felt we may be looking in the wrong direction.
Collins' idea that modern archaeologists had primarily been looking on the east side of Giza is true. A series of drilling studies and excavations had been done around the Sphinx, various temples and chambers had been examined on the east side, and ground-penetrating radar had been extensively performed around the Sphinx, the causeway from the Sphinx to the Middle Pyramid, and at other areas near the pyramids, but everyone had virtually ignored the west side of the plateau.
In 2006, Nigel Skinner Simpson came over to my home and we had a discussion about excavations and research at Giza, and he brought with him a fabulous plan of the plateau by the British engineer John Shea Perrin, who worked with the English explorer Colonel Howard Vyse. I looked on this and my eyes were drawn towards the northwest area of the plateau, because this is where the so-called Deneb spot was, i.e. the position that the star Deneb in Cygnus fell upon the actual ground at Giza. And I saw marked a crescent-shaped area of the north cliff, within which was some kind of cutting indicating a tomb, and in what appeared to be like dotted lines, some kind of complex structure which clearly the engineer Perrin had indicated was underground, and I looked on the rest of the plan and there was nothing similar to this at all. Now that intrigued me, but what intrigued me even more was the legend next to this little complex, for it said excavated tombs and pits of bird mummies. So this intrigued me, and I thought, is it possible that this marks the entrance into some kind of cave world at Giza that's been overlooked? Is it possible that these birds relate to some kind of local bird cult, and that they were revered, or some kind of bird god or goddess was being revered here, that was maybe seen as like some kind of guardian of the entrance into a cave world? We looked into this further and found that Vyse and Perrin had entered into this tomb in the North Cliff at Giza in May 1837, and there was no real record of what they discovered in here, other than one specific reference to them removing very carefully the remains of a large bird. Again, more confirmation that this was the site of some kind of bird cemetery or bird necropolis. Now there are other bird necropolises in Egypt, the most famous of which is at Saqqara, a few miles to the south of Giza, and the bird necropolis there stretches for many hundreds of yards, and I wondered whether something similar existed at Giza.
The presence of bird mummies at this spot caught Colin's attention because the Cygnus constellation is universally seen as a bird, usually a swan, but in Egypt the constellation was associated with the hawk and the ibis. This directly links Cygnus to Horus, the god of the underworld, and Hermes, or Thoth, the god who was traditionally the keeper of the sacred records.
It seemed to be an extremely large tomb, and there was a very deep cut entrance facade. And yet I could find absolutely nothing else about it in any publication to do with tombs and monuments of Egypt. It seemed to have been overlooked completely.
The discovery of this obscure tomb with bird mummies on Perrin's 1840 map of Giza led Andrew and Sue Collins to Egypt in January of 2007. They found the tomb by riding camels to the site along with a guide.
Sue and I eventually found the entrance, because obviously we didn't know exactly where it was on the ground. And it was huge, the entrance. I mean, it was a really deep cut, a facade which gave the impression of importance. Somewhere that should not have ever been overlooked. And we walked inside here and investigated the tomb, which is quite extensive, and we found further evidence of a bird cult connected with it. There were large slots, horizontal slots like you would have for a letterbox, of various sizes, some about a foot across, others possibly about a yard across, and quite deeply inset into the wall. And these most likely held the remains of mummies, bird mummies, and if not bird mummies, those of much smaller animals like shrew mouse, possibly snakes, things like that, that would have been offered to a bird dated connected with the site. This was the same as had occurred at Saqqara. You get these type of animal offerings in the bird necropolis there.
Right, we had looked into the tomb. I mean, it is a very dark place even in the tomb itself at some points in the year. We had looked around, we had entered all the rooms that were available actually in the tomb, and we thought we had checked every area there was to check. But again, it's under very difficult circumstances, and we checked and we just didn't see it, and we came away and thought, well, perhaps it's hidden, it's somewhere else. We may have actually got the wrong place.
We looked around and we found no entrance into any kind of deeper level, and clearly there was some kind of difference to what Perring's plan actually showed, because Perring's plan showed clearly a very extensive area, and we knew that that Perring was a very respected surveyor of the sites that he and Weiss investigated, and so we were missing something. But having said that, there was nothing more that Sue and I could do on this occasion. We returned home from our visit to what we were now referring to as the Tomb of the Birds, simply because there was no other title for it, and it had no obviously designated number or anything like this. And it intrigued me, but I got on with other projects. But there were things that kept pulling me back to the possible significance of this site. For instance, Rodney Hale started to work on some quite simple geometry of the plateau, and this included a right-angled Pythagorean triangle that embraced two peaks of the pyramids, the first pyramid and the second pyramid, plus the Sphinx, plus Jebel Gibli, the southern mount or hill at Giza, which is due south of the Sphinx, which by this time we were beginning to realise was probably a survey point for the development of the pyramid field, and possibly was seen as like some kind of hill or mound of creation as well. And the northwest corner of this right-angled triangle reached and virtually touched the position of the Tomb of the Birds.
We start with a map of Giza, which the plateau there, which shows the three pyramids. It shows the position of the entrance of the Tomb of the Birds leading into Collins Caves, and the Sphinx, and an important local hill called Jebel Gibli. Now, let us add now the stars of Cygnus superimposed, and we have immediately an important line developed from Alberio to the centre star and on, pointing towards the entrance to the Tomb of the Birds. That line is 307 degrees or 53 degrees west of north. This is very important, as you'll see with the later happenings. The stars don't precisely lie on the peaks here, but this is 2,600 years BC, which includes the proper motion of Gainer there. If you overlaid the present day stars, they would precisely match the peaks of the three pyramids. We have now included in red a Pythagorean 3-4-5 triangle with one point centered on Jebel Gibli. We move due north on this base there, which happens to pass right through the pores or the nose of the Sphinx, and then when we turn due west, we go through the peak of the Great Pyramid and pointing straight to the entrance of the Tomb of the Birds and the third side of the 3-4-5 triangle, which returns to Jebel Gibli. Once these trigonometrical things came up, it just in my mind just can't be coincidence.
In fact, it was almost quite obvious that that was the marker on one of the 3 corners of this triangle. Now I thought this is just too much of a coincidence. I mean, why would this be there? At which point Nigel Skinner Simpson told me about the recent publication for the first time of Salt's memoirs.
An important part of the story of the rediscovery of the cave at the Tomb of the Birds was that in 2003, Nigel Skinner Simpson had found references to a hidden set of catacombs explored by both the British diplomat Henry Salt and the Italian sea captain Giovanni Caviglia. They explored this area in the early 1800s, but it wasn't until 2007 that Nigel Skinner Simpson was able to obtain Salt's actual account.
It was on the 22nd of August 2003 at the British Library, and I ended up looking at the life and correspondence of Henry Salt by J.G. Holmes. Volume 2, just looking through that. And on page 92, I found a reference to some catacombs which I hadn't heard mentioned before. And the quote was that Caviglia, who was an Italian sea captain who also did archaeological explorations at Giza in the early 19th century, Caviglia examined some catacombs in the vicinity of the pyramids. And Caviglia and Henry Salt entered some few but found them too uninviting to prosecute their research. And it went on to mention Caviglia penetrating one of the many labyrinthian passages observed to a distance of 300 feet, but not finding anything. And I thought, well, sounds like quite a complex there, or there's quite a network of passages or something. They're quite extensive. And in all the reference works I've looked at, and I'd looked at quite a few, I've never seen any mention of it, and I couldn't tie down what it was. And so that set me off on a kind of a hunt to try and identify where these catacombs were, these extensive catacombs were, because all I knew was they were somewhere west of the Great Pyramid, basically, and there wasn't a lot to go on. So I was, over the years that went on, I would now and again try various approaches to try and make some headway on identifying what this set of passages, what this labyrinthian set of passages was, but I didn't really get anywhere. It was in 2002 that the Department of Ancient Egypt in the Sudan was moving its archives at the British Museum. They were being relocated, and they found 2 bound volumes. And when they opened them up and looked at them, one of them was manuscript written by Henry Salt of the excavations that had been carried out at Giza around about 1817, mainly by Caviglia and his explorations there with Caviglia, and a bigger volume of all the drawings he'd done at the time at Giza. And the British Museum didn't even know they had these. They'd just come back, they'd arrived, and they'd just been somewhere gathering dust. And the archivists realised the importance of these volumes. And it was in 2007 that they were actually published in full for the first time, complete with an introduction written by the staff at the British Museum. And previous to this, bits of it had appeared in various publications in the 19th century, but it had never been published complete and with all the accompanying drawings to go with it. And this came out in 2007, and I thought to myself, this might actually finally at last, I'm going to find out where these catacombs are. Salt wrote the following about the catacombs. He wrote, "Respecting the catacombs marked to the west of the pyramids, I have little to say.
We entered into one and followed up our researches through rude and craggy vaults, several hundred yards into the rock, creeping at times on our hands and knees among the bones and carcasses of camels and other animals carried there by the hyenas, which frequent these caves. At last we entered by forced passage through a thin wall into a spacious chamber, which presented nothing to our view but bare and mouldering walls. This chamber communicated with 3 others of equal dimensions, whence issued many labyrinthic passages which had too intricate and uninteresting an appearance to induce us to advance. Captain Caviglia informed me that he afterwards advanced in another direction, 300 feet farther, but found nothing to tempt him to continue his researches. The portals to these catacombs are ornamented externally, and none of them may be seen from the path before you mount up the hill on which the pyramids stand."
So this was great because it's obviously talking about the same place. It says here it's marked on the plan, QQ. There's a plan in the publication. So I turned to the plan and I couldn't find it. There was a review of the Sphinx revealed in the Egypt Exploration Society publication, Egyptian Archaeology. And in that, the reviewer had specifically mentioned this reference to the catacombs marked on the plan by QQ, and the reviewer stated that he'd been unable to find them on the plan. There was actually a note in the text which had been put in by the modern republishers saying where they thought these catacombs were, and they identified it as probably rock-cut cemetery G1600. That G1600 cemetery was not the one that was being indicated by Salt on his plan. I looked all over the plan and I just couldn't see anything that looked like Q's to me on that plan. So I was puzzled because I'd read in Salt's writings again about the catacombs, a better description, but again I couldn't actually see where it was he was talking about. And so that's why I sat down with a key to the map and the map itself, and I just went through every single reference, checking them off one by one and ticking them all off on the plan to see what was left at the end, to see if there was something that would be left that stood out that I hadn't already taken care of from the things I ticked off. And there were, and they looked like number 2s. But what they actually are capital Qs, but written the way that they were writing capital Qs early in the 19th century.
In May 2007, I met Nigel to discuss this new discovery at a cafe just outside of the British Museum.
And I told him about finding what appeared to be the location of these catacombs in this northern escarpment. Although at the time I was cautious, but that was, in that escarpment was the area where these extensive catacombs were. And the interesting thing about it was that there was one star in the Cygnus constellation called Deneb, which Andy hadn't been able to find any particular meaning to. So this was not far off that particular spot.
He gave me the full outline of Salt's memoirs and their significance, and I was absolutely amazed at this, because the area that had been designated as the position of Salt's so-called cave catacombs was precisely in the same area as the Tomb of the Birds. I was convinced from the word go that the caves would be found within the Tomb of the Birds. That to me was absolutely obvious, because I think that we'd already realised that this was a very significant site, and somehow we'd missed the entrance on our first visit.
What Nigel had actually found convinced us that there was obviously an opening somewhere in that tomb. There had to be. So we just needed to go back and really, really carefully scour every inch of that tomb, because we now knew that there was an entrance somewhere within inside.
The idea of trying to find this place again, which had been documented in the early 19th century, and then had been documented by Howard Vyse, and then appeared to vanish off the map effectively. The idea of finding it again was very exciting.
The whole of my life has just been an adventure to go and find out something, find out information that no one else has actually found out before. So the idea of actually going out there with a specific task in mind and to prove something, and that it was, you know, just us, was quite a big thing. So it was very, very exciting.
In March 2008, Andrew and Sue Collins went to Egypt along with Nigel Skinner Simpson with the intention of making surveys from Jebel Gibli and also finding the long-lost cave system.
So we once again hired camels. It was the easiest method to get to this area. And we reached it and we went back inside. We searched around, and the one area that I thought we might have missed something proved to be groundless. There was nothing there, and we were just about to leave when I went to the back of the tomb where there is a raised area, and I happened to notice a crack in the wall, and I realised that we'd completely missed this on our first visit. And at which point I called over Sue and Nigel. And Sue was the first to approach with a torch. We could just sense that we'd made a huge discovery.
What?
Oh my God!
Ah.
Wow!
Here's the rest of your Tomb of the Birds.
Wow! Oh my God! Oh, but like, there must be at least 10,000 bats in there.
With the overwhelming smell of bat guano filling the air, Andrew, Sue, and Nigel carefully moved into the cave system, entering first into a massive chamber with a high ceiling. They later dubbed this area the Dome. The dome was littered with huge boulders, but was completely dark, illuminated only by small flashlights and the occasional flash from their cameras. As they moved through the chamber, bats filled the air and breathing became increasingly difficult. One cave extension off the main chamber was found to be a dead end, with massive stones piled up at its end. But another cave passage was found extending to the south. Moving around and over huge rocks on the floor, the team went about 200 feet through this cave, finding that it split into two separate passages. One of them was a dead end. At that point, a bat flew into Andrew's head, and they decided that in the complete darkness, they had explored enough on this trip. Once outside, the Guardian told an incredible story about the cave.
After we came out the tomb on the first occasion, we spoke to a local tomb guardian, because we asked him, and we said, you know, are you aware of their existence? He said yes. He said that they went all the way to the Fayum oasis, which is about 45 miles to the south of Giza. Now, I don't believe that for a second, but I think that he was trying to indicate that they went for a long way. We said to him, have you actually been into the caves yourself? And in Arabic, as he spoke no English, and luckily Sue is able to speak the language, he said that that he would never go into the caves himself because they were haunted by a giant snake called El Hanash.
The only thing that kept coming to my mind about how I felt when we first looked through that opening was exactly how Howard Carter felt when he saw the treasures of Tutankhamun, and we kept recalling just saying wonderful things, wonderful things.
It was extremely treacherous in there. I mean, not only were there hundreds of bats around that were flying towards you at all times. One of them actually hit me in the face, and everywhere you trod was just dangerous. I mean, you could easily break a leg, and bear in mind that this is pitch black in here.
The first thing that struck me was the stench, unbelievable stench of bat guano and bats. And secondly was the fact the place was full of bats as well, and they are not my favourite creature by a long way. When I saw the entrance from the outside, cut into the rock, there was no doubt in my mind at all that it had to be the location that was shown by Perring. And I thought to myself, if this is the location, if this is Salt's location, I wonder what we're going to find in there, or wonder what can be found in there. How far is it going to go? What can be found in there that's been in there for, I don't know, hundreds of years, thousands of years? And the other thing was that it could well have gone, for all I knew, it could have gone on, and it could have connected up with other locations underneath the plateau.
A few days later, Andrew and Sue returned to the cave, managing to navigate their way to a distance of about 240 feet, until the heat and the guano dust in the air became unbearable.
Okay.
I did think it was going to
Pan out.
pan out.
No, okay, well, not to worry.
Along the way, they saw numerous bones and a few animal skulls, but they realized they hadn't reached the end.
Here we are back out, and that was quite an extraordinary experience, of course.
All right.
So what's your feelings now of
I mean, going back as far as that, I'm realising that it just doesn't stop. I mean, I couldn't quite get my head around the idea that those tunnels did actually stretch further and further and further and further.
I was absolutely elated that the caves had been found. The thing that really struck me at the time was how far do these things go, and what's going to be found when people actually get in there and really start clearing it out and investigating it properly.
We returned to the UK after our first entries into the caves, and to be honest, we just could not get the subject out of our mind. I perpetually dreamt about being back inside the caves, bats and whatever else. Plus, we realised that we just needed to go further. The pictures that we'd taken were incredible. They revealed far more than we could ever have seen with the eye. And we just realised we had to go back, and we just booked flights immediately and returned there in April.
A month later, Andrew, Sue, and Nigel returned to the caves, but were better prepared with breathing masks and more lights. At the tomb, they were stopped and questioned by Egyptian officials. The officials eventually allowed them to enter, but they remained at the site to monitor them, so they were not able to fully explore the cave that day. But just 2 days later, they returned one more time and managed to go as far as they could.
We are inside the cave system, beyond the Tomb of the Birds. This is the second time we've gone in here on this particular visit. We've come in here under a lot of duress, a lot of officials asking far too many questions what we're doing. We don't know whether we can stay in here, go, what we're supposed to do.
Somewhere and keep the light really low.
This time we penetrated them much deeper, reaching a distance of probably around 350 feet. And at the end, the caves within one final compartment or room seem to condense down into a stone tube at ground level around 2 foot in diameter. And we hesitated about going further. Sue was actually more courageous than I. She actually got down and started to go inside. You know, we knew by this time that there was poisonous spiders. They'd been seen. There were bugs within the tube, and also Sue heard what she was sure was some kind of creature or animal or something moving about. We have actually penetrated right the way through to the deepest part that we can reach at the moment, before it funnels down into a tube around 18 to 20 inches in width.
You then start having this feeling of total normality, of calmness coming about you. That place where you actually don't want to leave. You want to just remain, and it's just lovely and warm, and you almost feel like you want to sit down and have a sleep. And at that point we realised that there was another slight problem, which was the lack of oxygen. And we thought, right, okay, maybe we actually should think about getting back. But at this point we just pushed forward a little bit more, and we then came to what we thought was maybe the end of the cave system. However, it narrowed down into what we've now called the tube. So from where there was a huge ceiling height, a massive ceiling height, just seemed to go on forever, it now drops to only like 2 feet in height down a narrow tubeway. So as we entered the tube, we were still deciding as to whether really to go through it or not, but because we knew at that point there were also poisonous spiders in the cave, we were a little concerned about our safety. And at that point, in front of me, to the left-hand side, I could hear a noise. And it was just the sound of the rocks on the ground moving, being in a very, very dark place, in a very, very small tube, and you can hear something in front of you. We actually thought better of it. The moment we actually stepped out of the cave was almost the moment we regret not having just pushed ourselves further and further and further, because we would have loved to have just carried on as far as we could go. And it's something that you always beat yourself up about, because you think, why didn't I do it? But you know, safety does have to come first when you are confronted with such a serious situation as that.
We'll regret that for the rest of our life, I'm sure. We should have gone further. At the time of the discovery of the caves, I'd actually been working on a book about the history of the search for the so-called Hall of Records. So, of course, making this great discovery was changed everything, really. I mean, it changed obviously the content of the book. The publishers were incredibly excited by what had happened, but more importantly, we realised that we had to report these discoveries to the correct authorities, and that is the Supreme Council of Antiquities in Egypt, headed by Dr. Zahi Hawass, and both the publisher and ourselves made contact with Dr. Hawass to tell them exactly what had happened. In fact, myself and Sue actually had a meeting with Dr. Hawass in April 2009, where we actually presented him with a report relating to the discovery, or how we actually came to be there in the first place. And also we gave him various photographs of the caves. Now, at this point, he was not happy about the idea that we'd made the discovery. I think that he dismissed it. He basically claimed that the tomb was already known about and there was no new discoveries to be made here. Shortly after this, the publishers issued a statement relating to the cave discoveries, and this was picked up by news agencies and sites online, and over the summer period of 2009 the whole story went ballistic.
We'll take a look at local weather and traffic in a moment, but first, a bit of science news. MSNBC reported earlier today that a team of British explorers had identified the location of an extensive cave complex under the Giza Plateau by carefully going through the journal of Henry Salt, who was a British diplomat in Egypt in the early 1800s. In 1817, Salt found a cave system at Giza and wrote about it in his journal. But Salt's journal was apparently stored and eventually forgotten in the British Museum until it was found in 2007.
The book was scheduled to come out shortly, but before even the book was published, Dr. Hawass was essentially forced to issue a statement about the discoveries, where he denied that there were any caves at this site.
A few weeks ago, we reported on the discovery of a huge cave complex running beneath the Giza Plateau in Egypt. British explorer Andrew Collins announced the discovery last month. But in an internet blog issued last night by Dr. Zawi Hawass, who heads the Supreme Council of Egyptian Antiquities, Hawass says there is no underground cave complex at this site. Hawass related that Collins and his team were confused by an outer tomb and thought they had entered caves. Hawass also related that his office already knew everything about this site. Collins and supporters have countered that Hawass is the one confused and simply does not know the precise entrance point to the caves because it is hidden in a dark upper area in the outer tomb. This is an odd twist to the story, which we think may well lead to an interesting outcome. We'll let you know the full story when it materializes.
I believe that Dr. Hawass denied the existence of the cave because, firstly, he had no knowledge of them, genuinely had no knowledge of them, and secondly, did not consider the possibility that such a major discovery could be made within just a few hundred yards of the Great Pyramid. There had been all these great Egyptologists over the years that had done work on the plateau, and these caves had been missed by all of them. And indeed, during the same period, Egyptologists around the world started debating whether these cave discoveries were real, and it sent them all reaching for their books on the tombs and monuments, and all of them came back and said, well, there's nothing mentioned in any book that I've got. And the only people that did actually find anything was the Boston-Harvard expedition, which keeps the archives of George Reisner and his work at Giza right the way through until his death in 1942. They looked hard and found that that Reisner's team had actually done a rough plan of the tomb of the birds, which he designated NC2. North Cliff 2. There were two other smaller tombs in the vicinity, which were obviously NC1, NC3. However, intriguingly, this plan, which has not ever been published, does not show the caves at all. Plus, it does not show any kind of extensive lower level, as suggested by Perring's plan from around 1840. So they clearly seem to have missed the caves as well. Despite denying the existence of the caves inside the Tomb of the Birds, Dr. Hawass would appear to have immediately sent a team to clear the inside of the tomb to find out more about it, and discovered two entrances, one on each side of the lobes in the entrance to the structure, that had been covered, but also filled in, to the point that we hadn't noticed them, or nobody else would seem to have ever been aware of them. And these led to stairs, and these stairs, both of these stairs, led to the same place, which was a massive subterranean gallery, which stretched probably for around 130, 140 feet towards the south, from which on either side, east and west, were a series of large chambers, possibly 4 on each side, and this was a very extensive underground complex. And suddenly we were able to reconcile Perring's plan with the Tomb of the Birds. Sometime after these excavations of the lower level of the Tomb of the Birds had been completed, Dr. Hawass concreted in a grille or gate, a metal gate, over the entrance to the sepulchre, preventing any further access in here by anyone. And at first we thought, well, why is this? What's actually taken place? And this only became apparent several months later, when I became aware that he'd actually taken in a TV crew as part of a reality show called Chasing Mummies. And the idea of them going into here was to disprove the Pyramidians, that's people like me, who believed that there was a possibility that there was some kind of cave that went from this tomb all the way beneath the pyramids.
Over a year ago, we reported on the announced discovery of a large cave complex under the Giza Plateau by a team of British explorers led by science writer Andrew Collins. Immediately after that announcement, Dr. Zawi Hawass denounced the report, writing that no caves existed at that location, going on to ridicule the British team. But last night, the story took the most bizarre twist of all in an episode of the History Channel series called Chasing Mummies. The series has been widely criticized, and it stars Hawass, who takes a film crew and actors to archaeological sites in Egypt. In last night's episode, titled Bats, Hawass was actually shown the cave entrance by the American film crew. It was hidden inside an obscure tomb and was not listed on any modern surveys of Giza. Hawass and the film crew were harassed by thousands of bats as they explored the cave complex for a distance of 350 feet, which was the precise length mentioned by Collins in his book published over a year ago. Hawass was surprised by the extent of the cave complex and tried to show that the tunnel system did not extend all the way under the pyramids. But one of the passages narrowed down to a tube that was explored for 30 more feet before the archaeologist who crawled into it decided to turn back. How far this tunnel goes is unknown. The show did not mention Collins' discovery, and Hawass referred to those who disagree with him as Pyramidians. However, Hawass said that exploring the cave was the greatest adventure he had ever had at Giza. After the filming was done, Hawass had the outer entrance to the entire tomb and cave system sealed shut by concreting a steel gate to the opening. It seems that more remains to be found, and hopefully Egyptian authorities will allow more thorough exploration of the caves.
Andrew has a reputation for knowing ancient history, and he's got a solid reputation among many out there as being a very critical and credible-minded individual. And certainly this cave system could prove extremely significant down the road, and it's just appalling that Dr. Hawass had to be sort of forced by events to really even acknowledge that the cave system is there, and then referring to people who want to pursue it further that they're Pyramidians. It's just it's not really science at all.
Obviously I was disappointed that they didn't say that the tube went any further. However, the most important thing is that we've been vindicated.
The recent episode of Hawass's Chasing Mummies, titled The Bats, has certainly vindicated him and shown that this discovery does need to be pursued further and really discover what actually is in that cave system, if it does lead to the pyramids, and if there is some sort of ancient repository of some sort of ancient records or something that might be really an eye-opener.
The 2010 episode of Chasing Mummies was proof that Hawass was wrong about the caves. Despite his earlier denial that the caves even existed, Hawass professed his astonishment that they extended for such a distance. But Rodney Hale and Andrew Collins persisted in looking for even more evidence.
We'd found evidence from geology which suggested that the caves continued on in the direction of the second pyramid, far beyond the position that we reached.
I spotted this radar photograph that appeared on the internet, but lo and behold, it showed faint, shadowy, darker traces leading from the area of the cave entrance, sweeping down, 2 lines of them, towards the central pyramid.
The image of Giza was from a new type of ground-penetrating radar operated from satellite. Because there's nothing visible on the ground in that area in regular photographs, the ground-penetrating radar appears to show 2 underground fissures, fault lines, or caves running from the cave to the middle pyramid.
Dr. Hawass took in a team from Chasing Mummies that included 2 consulting archaeologists amongst them, and he did not believe that there were caves. In fact, to be honest, I don't think he even understood where the caves were at this time, because as he entered into the tomb, he went to walk down the newly uncovered stairs to go to the lower level, and the team themselves, who were aware of my work and my discovery, said, "Dr. Hawass, it's not down there, it's at the back of the tomb, the entrance into the caves." And he was led through the small slit in the wall into the opening chamber, and they then started to look at the various different exits from this chamber, and at first they found no evidence that they went on, and at which point he said, "Good, we'll move on to the next spot." But then, of course, they found the entrance into the main cave tunnel that runs towards the south. And Dr. Hawass and the Chasing Mummies team just explored this further and further, encountering the bats, and eventually they travelled for the same distance that we did, around 350 feet, reaching the stone tube, at which point one of the consulting archaeologists, David Cheatham, began to enter inside the tube. Whilst the editing of the show appeared to indicate that the tube went no further, this is not the case. When I watched the Bats episode of Chasing Mummies, which featured the caves, I was highly excited over everything that I was seeing. It was like going back in them again myself. And obviously I was trying to follow their every movement as if, you know, I was there, as if they might show something new or whatever. Obviously I was disappointed that they didn't say that the tube went any further. However, the most important thing is that we've been vindicated. Dr. Hawass had earlier said that the caves didn't exist, so efficiently they didn't exist. What the Chasing Mummies episode has done is to create a sound foundation point for future research to do with the caves, and that this subject is only going to grow as the years go on.
Firstly, to actually see a lot of the caves in the light, even though it wasn't fantastic, it was better than what we could actually have seen at the time. So it was great to actually see some really good footage of where we had been. And to see the bats, because I love bats, so that was great, watching all the bats. But I think what saddened me a lot was the fact of what should have been a really exciting idea that these caves could possibly lead to something else, or they could be important in themselves, seemed to have been forgotten. That it was just a case of saying, okay, yeah, the caves are here, but there's nothing else, and then dismiss it. It was like no interest in actually taking it further to actually understand the caves more or anything else about them. It was just, it was just dismissed, and I think that was really sad.
Dr. Hawass's position was that there was no cave system at all there, and he was on the program. You see where he was proven wrong about that, so he had to back up and say that it didn't go to the pyramids. It was more just politics than actual science.
There are so many things that need to be done in the future. This certainly isn't the end. This is just the beginning of a huge adventure down there. Obviously, not only do the caves need themselves to actually be mapped and to be surveyed, and for us to find out all the information we possibly can about any habitation that there ever was down there, if any. There's so many other options. The fact that, to me, I believe that these caves do run towards the second pyramid, that they probably do run to what I would class as a Hall of Records. Whether this is the actual entrance remains to be seen. I think it might have just been a back way in, shall we say. But it shows that there are indeed huge chambers underneath the Giza plateau.
The single most important thing at the moment with the caves is to get a good, accurate ground survey done. And you also need to take steps to protect the location, as has already been done, basically by cementing a grill over the front of it, to make sure that it stays relatively undisturbed until such time as a properly equipped team goes in there. The immensity of what we'd done at the time, on the spot, standing in that chamber, didn't really hit me. It was when we subsequently came outside the tomb that it really struck me. And the reason for that was because the conditions inside were so horrendous that my mind was kind of focused pretty much on that, rather than standing back and thinking about the enormity of it all at that particular instant.
My best guess at the use of the caves in Egyptian times is that they were sacred to Thoth and his Greek counterpart Hermes, and that if this is the case, then the bird mummies that were found there were probably that of the ibis. They're described as large, and the only large bird that seems to fit the bill at this point in time is that of the ibis. And if this is correct, then this is very significant, because there were ancient traditions that the tomb of Hermes actually existed on the plateau at Giza, and I reckon that the Tomb of the Birds and the caves associated with them were seen as the entrance into a symbolic tomb of Hermes. The significance of the tomb of Hermes is twofold. Firstly, he was said to have been buried with the original of something called the Emerald Tablet within his hands. This was some kind of large stone made of green stone or emerald that was said to hold within its inscription the keys of creation. However, this is obviously a legend that built up probably in Roman times and was carried through to the Arab era, where it was first really recorded. But it might well be that this reference to a green tablet actually refers to the hidden chamber itself, and it could well be that the walls of this chamber were originally green in colour, some kind of green stone, and that maybe within these walls are inscribed the original form of some kind of text of creation, maybe even the original of the pyramid texts. The books of creation in ancient Egyptian tradition told of the creation of the physical universe and the actual world itself from some kind of mound that rose out of the primordial chaos, the primeval waters, and that how the first mythical beings came along and created on this island some kind of structure, which went on to become the first temple, the role model of all other temples constructed in Egypt. But what's significant is that the clearest version of those creation texts that remain today at the Temple of Edfu in southern Egypt talk about some kind of underground structure reached from within this island, a structure that's known as the underworld of the soul, and that within this was some kind of power object representing a seed or embryo, which symbolised the point of first creation.
Whether or not more exploration of the caves will take place in our lifetimes is unclear, but one thing is known. Despite the official denial, the caves do exist, and they extend well under the Giza Plateau and perhaps much further than we've been told. But for the moment, we're left with more questions than answers. Does the cave complex lead to the spot where the star Deneb falls on the plateau? Do the caves lead under the second pyramid and perhaps go all the way to the Sphinx and the well that Collins found in the Muslim cemetery? Are the caves a way to gain access to other tunnels and perhaps to the mythical Hall of Records? Are they a doorway to the tomb of Hermes? With the many political and social upheavals that have taken place in Egypt in 2011, it remains to be seen what will happen. All we can do now is hope that more archaeological work will be permitted. Sometimes hope is all we have, but sometimes hope is enough. The Sphinx itself has been said to peer into endless time as it watches and waits. And that is what we're left with, watching and waiting.